The conversation started innocently enough at Sunday dinner, the way these family gatherings always began, before spiraling into subtle competitions and thinly veiled criticisms. Chloe had spent the first 20 minutes showing off photos of her latest home improvement project, a kitchen renovation that featured marble countertops, custom cabinets, and a backsplash she'd been planning for months. "It's amazing what homeownership allows you to do," she said, scrolling through her phone to display yet another angle of the pristine granite surfaces. "The equity just keeps building month after month, unlike some people who throw money away on rent every single month with nothing to show for it." Mom passed the potatoes and nodded approvingly, her face lighting up with maternal pride. Chloe has always been the smart one with money, very practical about long-term investments and building wealth. She thinks ahead. I continued eating my dinner quietly, accustomed to these subtle digs about my apparent financial shortcomings. To the family, I was the underachiever, the one who worked at what they assumed was a small consulting firm, drove a modest Honda Civic that was 3 years old, and lived in what they believed was a rental apartment in a less prestigious part of town. "Speaking of rent," Dad chimed in, cutting his steak with more force than necessary. "Maybe it's time you started thinking seriously about your future, Mia. You can't rent forever like some college student." At 29, most successful people are building equity and investing in real estate, not paying someone else's mortgage month after month. Chloe leaned back in her chair with a satisfied smile, clearly enjoying her position as the financially successful sibling. "I mean, I totally get it. Not everyone has the credit score or down payment saved up for property ownership. The requirements are pretty steep these days, but there are first-time buyer programs available, even for people in your particular situation." The condescension dripped from every carefully chosen word. Chloe had always positioned herself as the accomplished sibling, the one who had her entire life mapped out and executed perfectly. She'd graduated from business school with honors, landed a prestigious marketing position at a major pharmaceutical company, and purchased her first house at 26 with what she claimed was careful financial planning and disciplined saving. Meanwhile, I was just Mia, the quiet one who kept to herself, never seemed to amount to much professionally, and appeared content with a modest lifestyle that screamed underachiever to anyone paying attention. "The housing market is incredibly competitive right now," Uncle Dave added from across the table, always ready to pile on when the family discussed my various shortcomings. "You need substantial income, perfect credit, and a significant down payment. It's definitely not for everyone. Some people just aren't cut out for that level of financial responsibility." I nodded politely and took another bite of green beans, my standard response to these weekly assessments of my life choices. "You're all probably right about that. Don't get me wrong," Chloe continued, clearly relishing the spotlight and the opportunity to showcase her superior understanding of personal finance. "There's absolutely nothing wrong with renting. Some people just aren't cut out for the responsibilities that come with homeownership. The constant maintenance, the property taxes, the insurance premiums, the HOA fees. It's a lot to handle, and it requires a certain level of financial sophistication." Mom reached over and patted my hand sympathetically, her expression mixing concern with disappointment. "Maybe you could start small, honey. A little condo or townhouse, something manageable. Work your way up gradually." "If she can even qualify for a mortgage," Dad muttered, not quite under his breath, but loud enough for everyone to hear. The family dinner continued for another hour and a half, with more detailed stories about Chloe's home improvements, her recent promotion to senior marketing manager, and her ambitious 5-year plan to upgrade to an even larger house in the suburbs with a 3-car garage and a swimming pool. I listened quietly, occasionally nodding when someone addressed me directly, maintaining the role I'd played for years. As we were clearing dishes and preparing dessert, Chloe cornered me in the kitchen while the others moved to the living room. "I hope you don't take what Dad said too personally. He just wants to see you succeed and build something meaningful." "We all do, really." "I know," I replied methodically, rinsing plates and loading them into the dishwasher. "If you ever want some advice about getting pre-approved for a mortgage or connecting with a good real estate agent, I'm totally happy to help," she offered. "I know this amazing woman who specializes in helping first-time buyers, especially those working with more limited budgets. She's very patient and understanding about different financial situations." I smiled and thanked her for the generous offer, maintaining the facade that had become second nature over the years. The drive home gave me time to reflect on the evening's conversation and the familiar patterns that had emerged. This wasn't new territory. These family dinners had followed the same basic script for years. Chloe would showcase her latest achievement or acquisition. The family would praise her financial acumen, and I would sit quietly while they discussed my apparent lack of ambition. What they didn't know, what none of them had any idea about, was that I'd been paying Chloe's mortgage for the past 2 years. It started small and innocuous, the way these things often do. Chloe had called me in tears about 18 months after buying her house, explaining through sobs that her marketing job wasn't as stable as she'd initially believed. The pharmaceutical company was going through a major restructuring, her entire department was being eliminated, and she was facing a 3-month gap in employment. "I don't know what I'm going to do, Mia," she'd sobbed over the phone. "The mortgage payment is $3,200 every month, and I've only got enough in savings to cover maybe 6 weeks. I can't lose this house. Not after everything I went through to get it." She begged me not to tell the family. Her carefully constructed image as the successful sister was everything to her. So, I helped. Initially viewing it as a temporary solution, I set up a monthly automatic transfer from my business account to hers. It was supposed to be brief, but then she found a new job that paid significantly less, a $30,000 annual pay cut. She kept the house by continuing to accept my monthly payments, framing them as a temporary loan she would definitely pay back once she got promoted. That was over a year ago. While Chloe delivered lectures about building equity, I was literally financing her version of the American dream. Every month, I transferred $3,200 to keep her afloat while she basked in the family's admiration. The consulting firm I supposedly worked for was actually a cover for my real business, a property management company I'd built from the ground up. I owned 17 rental properties scattered across the city. My business was thriving so well that I could subsidize my sister without feeling it, but explaining that reality would destroy the family dynamic. Monday morning brought my usual routine. I checked the overnight email from my property manager, Linda. My 17 properties were performing well with occupancy rates above 95%. Linda reported that the Riverside property was getting multiple applications above the listed rent. I approved a rent increase and moved on. Then, my phone buzzed with a text from Chloe. "Thanks again for dinner last night. Mom loved it. By the way, I'm super excited about the new backsplash. Already thinking about redoing the master bathroom next. You know how home improvement projects go." I stared at the message. The bathroom upgrade would cost another $15,000 to $20,000 money she didn't have. That evening, I made a decision. I called Linda first. "I need you to stop processing the monthly payment from Chloe for the Riverside property effective immediately. Stop accepting any payments from her entirely starting next month." Next, I called Chloe. "Mia, what's up?" she answered cheerfully. "We need to talk about the monthly mortgage payments," I said bluntly. "They're stopping. Next month will be the last payment." Silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds. "What do you mean stopping?" "Mia, you know I can't afford the full mortgage payment on my own. We had an arrangement for 24 months, but I can't continue subsidizing your lifestyle indefinitely." "But I'm finally starting to get ahead financially," she protested. "The bathroom renovation will add significant value." "Mia, I can't keep subsidizing your mortgage while you lecture me about financial responsibility," I cut in. "Last night you spent an hour explaining why I should buy property while I pay your mortgage every month. I can't lose this house, Mia. It would destroy me professionally. If the family found out, that's not my problem to solve anymore." 3 days later, Chloe called an emergency family meeting. Her eyes were red-rimmed as she announced she had serious financial difficulties. When Dad asked if she needed a loan, she admitted, "Mia has been paying my entire mortgage for the past 2 years. The room went silent. Uncle Dave stared at me. "Mia? The one who—" "The monthly payments were $3,200. I confirmed. Dad looked bewildered. "But you don't even own property. How could you afford that?" "My consulting firm manages $12 million in residential real estate assets," I said calmly. "I personally own 17 rental properties. Chloe's mortgage represents about 8% of my monthly rental income. I placed a portfolio summary Linda had prepared on the table. Dad picked it up with shaking hands. This says your properties are worth over $4.2 million. Current market assessment. I nodded. Why didn't you tell us? Mom whispered. Because you all think she's the family failure. Chloe snapped, her embarrassment turning to defensive anger. How was I supposed to explain that the successful sister needed support from the unsuccessful one? The room fell quiet as the implications sank in. So, when you've been giving me advice about building equity, I let the sentence hang. I know how it sounds, Chloe said miserably. I just wanted to keep up the image. Dad cleared his throat. Mia, I owe you a serious apology. We all do. We've been completely wrong. Wrong about a lot of things, I agreed. But why didn't you say anything? Mom asked. Because I didn't need your approval to build a profitable business, I replied. But I did get tired of funding Chloe's lifestyle while she lectured me. If this story about finding your own path and breaking free from expectations resonates with you, please consider subscribing to the channel and sharing this video. Your support truly helps me continue to share these experiences and grow. What happens now with the house? Chloe asked, looking up from her tissues. That's your problem to solve, I said firmly. Sell it, downsize, or increase your earnings, but I'm not subsidizing you anymore. The meeting ended with uncomfortable silences and half-hearted apologies. Over the following weeks, Chloe faced reality. She listed the house and abandoned the renovation plans. At the next family dinner, the dynamic had shifted. Instead of showing off, Chloe discussed house hunting for a smaller place. Dad asked thoughtful questions about my business, and Mom was genuinely curious about my success. I still can't believe you never said anything, Chloe admitted over dessert. My money goes toward acquiring assets, not lifestyle inflation or impressing people, I explained. A month later, Chloe sold her house and bought a smaller condo that fit her budget. The equity paid off her debts. It's actually really nice, she told me later. No more pretending. The family dynamics evolved. Dad asked for investment advice. Uncle Dave became deferential, and Chloe and I finally built an honest relationship. I still feel terrible about taking your money while criticizing you, Chloe said months later. It taught me something valuable, I replied. Family support shouldn't enable people to avoid reality. When Chloe's house sale closed, she sent me a text. First mortgage payment on the condo, paid entirely from my own account. Feels absolutely amazing. Thank you for finally saying no. It was closure. Chloe was learning to live authentically, and I had learned to set boundaries. No more assumptions, no more lectures, and most importantly, no more maintaining illusions. That was definitely worth celebrating. His certainty about academic barriers and intellectual contributions appeared to be undergoing some rapid recalibration. Leo, poor Leo, was staring at his phone screen with the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle that had too many pieces. Aunt Elena, he said slowly. It says here that Dr. Elena Vance is the director of quantum computing research at Harvard, and that she's been there for 8 years. Ashley, who'd been explaining the rarity of true academic brilliance, was conducting what appeared to be a frantic Google search on her phone. Her face was growing paler with each search result. There's a Wikipedia page, Leo continued, his voice barely above a whisper. It says you have patents in quantum computing that are worth billions of dollars, and that you've published in Nature, Science, and Physical Review letters. He looked up from his phone. It says you're one of the leading quantum physicists in the world. The silence stretched on. Someone's ice clinked in their glass. Victoria finally found her voice. But you teach at community college. The statement came out as a question, as if she was hoping I might confirm that reality was still functioning according to her understanding. I smiled politely. I volunteer there one evening a week, teaching basic mathematics to adult learners who are working toward their GEDs. I paused. They're remarkable students, actually. Much more motivated than many of the Harvard undergraduates. Julian's phone had apparently joined the Google search party. Holy times T, he whispered, then immediately looked around the room in embarrassment. I mean, Dr. Vance, It says here that you revolutionized quantum error correction and that major tech companies are bidding for licenses to your patents. Catherine was scrolling through what appeared to be news articles. There's a Forbes piece about the 30 most influential scientists under 40, she said weakly. You're number 7. My father, who remembered my college professors being merely encouraging, was staring at his own phone screen. Elena, he said slowly, it says here that you gave a TED Talk that has 18 million views about quantum computing applications in medicine. I nodded. That was a few years ago. The technology has advanced considerably since then. Richard, the expert on intellectual hierarchies, was reading what appeared to be a Harvard University press release. It says you're leading a research team of 47 scientists and that your lab has secured over $200 million in federal funding. He looked up at me with the expression of someone whose understanding of the world had just been fundamentally reorganized. And that you're the youngest person ever appointed to direct a major research initiative at Harvard. The quantum computing breakthrough they'd called about was the culmination of 8 years of research that had consumed my life in the best possible way. We'd solved problems that had been considered theoretically impossible just 5 years ago. The applications stretched across cybersecurity, medical research, financial modeling, and artificial intelligence in ways that would reshape entire industries. But standing in my parents' living room, surrounded by people who just spent an hour explaining why I wasn't intellectually equipped for serious academic work, all I could think about was how I'd spent the last decade attending family gatherings where my career was treated as a source of gentle disappointment. Victoria was still processing. But you never said anything. You let us think. She trailed off, apparently unable to finish the sentence. You seemed very certain about my limitations, I said gently. I didn't want to contradict your assessment. Ashley, who'd explained the rarity of true academic brilliance, was reading what appeared to be my academic biography. Dr. Vance completed her PhD at Stanford at age 24, published her first breakthrough paper at 26, and was recruited by Harvard at 29. She looked up from her phone. You're 33 now, which means you've been leading quantum computing research at Harvard since you were 29, I confirmed. It was quite an adjustment, actually, managing a research team while trying to maintain my own experimental work. Julian had found a video interview I'd given to Scientific American. She's explaining quantum entanglement like it's basic arithmetic. He looked at me with something approaching awe. I can't understand half of what you're saying. The room had transformed from a venue for dispensing wisdom about intellectual limitations to something resembling a fact-checking operation. Every phone was active. Every family member was discovering layers of my professional life that had somehow escaped their attention for the better part of a decade. Leo found my publication record. Aunt Elena, you've published 63 papers in peer-reviewed journals. And your H-index is... He paused, apparently learning what an H-index was in real time. It says here that an H-index above 40 is considered outstanding for a full career. Yours is 72. Catherine was reading what appeared to be a Nobel Prize speculation article from the previous year. It says here that you're considered a leading candidate for the Physics Prize, and that your quantum error correction work has opened up entirely new fields of research. My mother, who'd been concerned about my unrealistic expectations, was staring at a photo of me shaking hands with the president during a White House science advisory meeting. Elena, she said slowly, when did you meet the president? Last year, I said. There was a briefing about quantum computing applications for national security. Several of us were asked to provide technical guidance. Richard was reading what appeared to be a patent database. The intellectual property portfolio associated with your research is valued at $8.7 billion. He looked at me as if I just announced I was secretly a member of the royal family. How is that possible? The quantum computing patents were indeed worth billions, but that wasn't really the point. The point was that we'd solved fundamental problems about how information could be processed and secured. The financial implications were secondary to the scientific breakthrough, though I understood why that might be difficult to explain to people who just spent an hour discussing my intellectual limitations. If this story of quiet resilience and proving others wrong resonates with you, please consider subscribing to the channel and sharing this video. Your support helps me continue to bring these stories to life. Victoria had found a video of my most recent conference presentation. You're speaking to an audience of hundreds of scientists and they're listening to you like you're—" He paused, apparently struggling with the concept. "Like she's one of the leading experts in her field," Leo finished. "Which, according to everything I'm reading, she is." The transformation in the room was remarkable to witness. 37 people who'd been absolutely certain about my intellectual capacity 15 minutes earlier were now confronting evidence that their certainty might have been somewhat misplaced. Ashley found an article about my research team's latest breakthrough. It says here that your quantum computer achieved a level of error correction that was previously thought to be impossible, and that this breakthrough makes large-scale quantum computing commercially viable for the first time. I glanced at my watch. I should probably start heading to the airport. The press conference is scheduled for tomorrow morning, and there are several government agencies that need briefings before then. The announcement seemed to break whatever spell had fallen over the room. People began moving again, though with a somewhat shell-shocked quality. Catherine approached first, her book club confidence replaced by something resembling humility. "Elena, I have to ask, why didn't you ever correct us? When we would talk about your career, when we would—" She trailed off, apparently unable to finish. I considered the question carefully. "You all seemed very confident in your assessments. I thought perhaps you knew something about me that I didn't." Julian, who'd been explaining intellectual hierarchies with such authority, was scrolling through articles about quantum computing applications. "Dr. Vance, Aunt Elena, I'm reading about how your research is going to revolutionize cybersecurity, medical imaging, financial modeling." He looked up at me. How did we not know any of this? It was a fair question. I'd been living a double life of sorts. Internationally recognized quantum physicist by day, family disappointment by evening. The compartmentalization had become so natural that I'd stopped thinking about it as unusual. Victoria was still holding her phone, staring at a photo of me receiving an award from the National Science Foundation. "But you're so normal when you come to family gatherings. You never act like—" She gestured helplessly. "Like someone who's revolutionized quantum computing," Leo suggested. He'd apparently become the family's designated Google researcher. Richard was reading what appeared to be a news article about federal science funding. "It says here that your research has strategic national importance, and that you work closely with the Department of Defense, the NSF, and NASA." He looked at me with something approaching reverence. Are you going to be in trouble for missing meetings to come to Leo's graduation party?" I smiled. The breakthrough happened faster than we expected. These kinds of scientific developments don't follow convenient schedules. I paused. But family is important too. I'm glad I could be here for Leo's celebration before flying back to Boston. The room had completely reorganized itself around this new information. People who'd been dispensing wisdom about my limitations were now asking respectful questions about quantum physics. The intellectual hierarchy that had seemed so clear and established 15 minutes earlier had been completely inverted. My father approached with the careful expression of someone navigating unfamiliar territory. "Elena, I have to admit, this is unexpected. When you were younger, your teachers always said," he trailed off, "that I needed extra help with advanced mathematics." I finished. I did. I was working on concepts that weren't typically taught in high school. My teachers were trying to be supportive, but they didn't have the background to recognize what I was actually struggling with. Ashley had found a video interview where I discussed the inspiration for my research. "You're talking about how quantum mechanics could revolutionize medicine, about quantum sensors that could detect diseases at the cellular level." She looked at me with genuine curiosity. "How long have you been thinking about this stuff?" "Since I was about Leo's age," I said. "I started reading about quantum mechanics in high school, but it wasn't until graduate school that I realized I could contribute something meaningful to the field." Julian was reading about the practical applications of quantum computing. "It says here that your research could make current cybersecurity obsolete overnight, and that every major tech company is trying to license your patents." He paused. Are you rich?" It was such a direct question that several people in the room winced. But it was also a reasonable thing to wonder about, given that my intellectual property was apparently worth billions of dollars. "The university and I share the patent rights," I said diplomatically. "But yes, the licensing agreements have been quite favorable." Catherine was reading what appeared to be a university press release about my research funding. It says here that you're the principal investigator on grants totaling over $200 million. She looked at me with something approaching awe. That's more money than most people see in their entire lives. The federal funding was necessary for the research, but it also came with enormous responsibility. $200 million meant that 47 brilliant scientists were depending on my ability to ask the right questions and design the right experiments. It meant that multiple government agencies were counting on our research to advance national security and economic competitiveness. But explaining all of that to people who just discovered I wasn't actually a community college math teacher seemed like it might be overwhelming. Leo had found a documentary that featured my research. There's a whole section about how quantum computing could revolutionize artificial intelligence in medical research. He looked around the room. Aunt Elena is basically helping to build the future. The transformation was complete. The family gathering had evolved from a celebration of Leo's high school graduation to an impromptu seminar on quantum physics and the nature of intellectual achievement. People who'd been experts on my limitations were now asking me to explain concepts that had taken me years to master. Victoria approached with the careful expression of someone who realized they might need to apologize but wasn't quite sure how. Elena, I have to ask, when we would talk about your career, when we would suggest that community college teaching was more your speed, what were you thinking? I considered the question. What had I been thinking during all those family gatherings where my professional life was dissected and found wanting? Mostly, I'd been thinking about quantum error correction algorithms and the fundamental nature of information processing. The family conversations had felt like background noise compared to the problems I was trying to solve in my lab. I was usually thinking about work, I said. Honestly, quantum mechanics is pretty consuming once you get deep into it. Julian was reading an article about the commercial applications of my research. It says here that your quantum computing breakthrough could be worth hundreds of billions of dollars to the global economy. He looked at me with something approaching disbelief. You've basically invented the future. The future felt more modest from my perspective. We'd solved some important problems about how quantum systems could maintain coherence long enough to perform useful calculations. It was significant work, but it was also the result of thousands of scientists building on each other's discoveries over decades. Still, standing in my parents' living room, surrounded by people who were discovering that their understanding of the world might have been somewhat incomplete, I had to admit there was a certain satisfaction in the moment. My phone buzzed with another message from Harvard. The media interest in our breakthrough was apparently more intense than expected, and they needed me to coordinate with the university's public relations department before the press conference. I really do need to get to the airport, I said, gathering my purse. But thank you for including me in Leo's celebration. It was educational. As I walked toward the door, I could hear the family continuing to process this new information. Phones were still buzzing with Google searches and Wikipedia articles. Conversations were starting up about quantum physics and patent law and the nature of genius. Victoria caught up with me at the front door. Elena, she said quietly, I owe you an apology. We all do. The way we talked about your career, your intelligence, we were completely wrong. I smiled at my sister. This person who'd known me her entire life but had somehow missed the fact that I was leading a quantum computing revolution. You weren't wrong about everything, I said gently. I am too simple for academia, in a way. The best scientific insights usually come from asking very simple questions about very complex problems. She stared at me for a moment, then laughed. Even your apology acceptance is more sophisticated than anything I said all evening. As I drove toward LAX, I thought about the family gathering I just left. 37 people had spent the evening discovering that their understanding of reality might have been somewhat incomplete. It was a feeling I recognized from my own scientific work. That moment when you realize that everything you thought you knew was just the beginning of a much larger and more interesting story. The quantum computing breakthrough that had prompted Harvard's urgent call would indeed change how the world processed information. But standing in my parents' living room, watching my family's understanding of intellectual achievement reorganize itself in real time, I realized that some of the most interesting transformations happen not in laboratories, but in the spaces between what we think we know and what turns out to be true. My phone rang as I pulled into the airport parking garage. This time it was the Nobel Committee. They wanted to discuss my research in advance of their annual deliberations. I answered on the second ring. "This is Dr. Vance."